My name is Joseph Zipfel. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at SFC Capital. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Francesca Cordeiro, founder and CEO of Novai. Francesca is a clinician scientist. She's the chair of ophthalmology at Imperial College London, a UCL professor. She's a leading expert in ophthalmology and in particular in the topics of glaucoma and retinal neurodegeneration. She won multiple international awards as a regular keynote speaker on these topics. Francesca, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you on.
Grateful to be here. Thank you, Joseph. Lovely to see you again.
So Francesca, I said a few words about your background, but it would be great to hear from you, basically about the work that you've done prior to founding Novai and starting Novai and what kind of led you here.
Thanks, Joseph. So I've been very interested in what you call translational research. In other words, getting an idea from the bench to the bedside. And this was one of my big ideas. I've been working on it for many years. I was very lucky that I had Wellcome Trust funding. That was around £4 million. And that really allowed me to take it from the lab right through to clinical phase 2 trials. So it was a natural progression, actually, to then have this commercialization of the idea, because that was the only way it was going to move forward. And I think it's unusual for a startup to already have that amount of academic and clinical validation, because when we started the company, when Novai was formed, with SFC actually as our seed investors, we had this data to hand, which also then made it possible to have revenue. And I think this whole idea of translating from the lab to the patient has been a passion of mine. Obviously, this one is my big one. I always call DARC my third child, because it's a little bit younger than my younger daughter in terms of the evolution, development, and growth, actually.
Okay, very good. And so, what was the initial project that led to Novai? This project funded by the Wellcome Trust. What was the objective, and how did that lead to Novai directly?
So, primarily, I'm a glaucoma consultant. So, I looked after glaucoma patients, and for me, it's a real heartsick moment when you have a patient who you've thrown absolutely everything at. Medicine, as in drops, laser, surgery, and they still carry on losing vision. And what really is at the back of that, and indeed this is true for all neurodegenerative conditions, is that we have identified the disease far too late, so that they've already lost vision, and then they're on a steep downward slope. So we come in too late, even though our treatments are good at stopping progression, they don't stop it completely. And the whole idea of neuroprotection, which is stopping neurons or nerve cells dying, is to get around that. But in the trials that have existed in diseases like glaucoma, and until recently even Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, there has not been an early enough way of picking up disease. And when you stratify those diseases, those patients who are identified much earlier actually do the best. And my aim was stopping people losing vision in the first place.
This particular project then, what was it? What was the initial objective, and how did that, at what point did you think this is not just research, this is a commercial venture that we're setting up here?
So the biologic is based on a protein, an exon 5, that has been used for many years in cell biology. In fact, I was already using it for my PhD and beyond, because it was a very good assay. At the time, it was just for looking at what people thought was apoptosis or programmed cell death. But actually, what it really identifies, because it's not an antibody, it's a natural protein that lives in all of us, but it actually shows cells that are under stress. And so the connection with me is just as we were using it in cell biology, we were using it in a tissue culture plate. We were able to perform an assessment under fluorescence microscope. Being an eye doctor, I took advantage of the fact that the eye is transparent. Just as you're using it to look out, I can use those same pathways to look at the back of the eye, and that actually is like a petri dish of cells. And so applying the same technique from cell biology tissue culture plates to what we really are now doing, which is giving it to patients, that was the big difference. That was the big move. How can I use something that's already been established in cell biology for a identification of disease activity? And obviously, it sounds simple now, but trying to get it through the various phases, you have to have enough confidence and validation at each step of the way. You have to have enough validation. For example, I changed the fluorescent tag so that it could be seen with a wavelength that could be used by conventional machines, and also has absolutely good distribution and accessibility. First, I had to validate that in vitro. Then we had to do the preclinical studies, and then that includes safety and tox. And then, of course, it then went to the patient. So all those things literally came from a very small idea of, can we take advantage of the eye being transparent? Can we use a test that is routinely used in labs around the world and transfer that to the eye?
And was there a moment where you thought, this is working better than I thought, this actually can be turned into a technology that could be used commercially as a diagnostic tool eventually?
Absolutely. Our first big paper, which was in PNAS, which is a well-recognized scientific publication, that was probably what made me realize that it was exciting and it could actually be something applied to humans. Really interestingly, if you ever go back and look at that paper, you'll see at the end I say this has potential to actually be used not only for glaucoma and retinal diseases, but also the brain, and can be transferred very quickly. Of course, that was a little bit optimistic, years down the line, and lots of validation. And I think I don't regret that. I think the academic funding just made it even more important to ensure that it was credible. And then we've learned so much along the way. And, I think the fact that we're not necessarily only concentrating on glaucoma, our big concentration now is on macular degeneration, all those things, recognizing that they could be used in macular degeneration was a huge change for me. So each of these have been like light bulb moments, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The great thing with Novai is that even though it was a very young company, it was actually founded on the grounds of years and years of research, very well funded research. So it was quite a mature technology from a science point of view. And one thing I wanted to talk about as well is the obviously you're making use of artificial intelligence, which is today's buzzword. AI is everywhere, but you were quite early on that bandwagon. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, how AI is used? People who might look at Novai, might do a bit of research, might come across other companies or AI tools making certain claims in terms of the ability to do AI-based eye tests and diagnostics. How does Novai, compete with that? Why is Novai unique? What does the underlying technology do that those other tests will not be able to match?
Okay, so I think I'll break that into two bits. I'll answer your second one first, if I may, and then I'll go back to the AI. So as I mentioned, this Petri dish, single cells, what Novai's biologic really does is look at single cells at the back of the eye. There is no other technology that can do that. The idea of using the scans that you have in your opticians and your ophthalmologists, those scans, which are usually what we call OCT, optical coherence tomography, they basically provide like cross sections optically of the different sections of the eye. Changes in those are reflective of a structural change. by that I mean a tissue change. It's not a single cell change. And that's even with AI, because the actual scans just provide a tissue analysis, you can't then extrapolate to single cells. The other ones which you will know of is, testing your vision when you go to the optician, or having your visual field tests. All of those things are pretty late in the day when they get affected. For example, with a visual field and glaucoma, we say 10 years between when you start the disease and when a visual field defect changes. And that, again, is because you first have this single cell change, which we are looking at really early on. You then get tissue changes, which is what the structural scans like OCT show. And then you get the functional change, which is what a drop in your vision or in a visual field defect is. So there is nothing, even with AI, that can interpret the structure or the function that really looks at single cells. And I think that is definitely our real differentiating factor. The other thing also is, at the stage we look at, it is reversible. You can modify that cell, modulate whether it becomes sick and whether it dies eventually, or whether you can reverse it into being healthy again. So it provides a snapshot of disease activity, but it's modifiable disease activity. And I think that's key. It's very exciting on that level. Now, you asked me about AI, and I don't know if, firstly, what I've just said made sense regarding how we are so different from any competitive technology. But the AI aspect actually was really initially based on a very simple finding. These cells appear as white spots. Someone has said to me, like stars in the night sky. And actually, if you look at a picture of what we have of the back of the eye, you could say it looks like that. The idea of AI and being used for the analysis was because it's actually difficult for people to agree what a spot was, because there is no definition. There's nothing else in medicine that uses this technology. And so, what one person was calling a spot may not be what another did, but also that same person may not call that a spot a day later. So what the AI did, and we basically used a convolutional neural network, is it provided a robustness. The ground truth was still observers, human observers. And in our first iteration, we used 5 human observers, and the ground truth is where 2 or more of those 5 observers agreed a spot was a spot. Now, when we compared the manual observers, 2 greater than 5, to actually the CNN, the AI, in fact, the robustness could be seen by the fact that there were a lot more spots that the CNN, the AI, found. So that's been just one aspect of it on a simple scale, just looking at the identification and count of those spots. But we've been using it also for other things. For example, we can do, just as you have a geographical contour map, looking at a hill and, high land and low land, we've looked at color density maps to provide us an idea of where there's a lot of single cells that are stained with dark and where there are very few. Now, why that becomes important is each of the diseases of the eye tend to have patterns. Okay, so in something like macular degeneration, the pattern is that you have a lot of cells that are stressed around the macula, which is the central point of vision looking. So that's key for us to be able to differentiate that for something like glaucoma, where it follows a different pattern. So the AI is also helping with that. And ultimately, it's looking at which cell type, because each disease has a different cell type that's affected. So what Novai has brought, and I know you know this, but let me just explain, the whole word of Novai comes from nova, meaning enlightenment, and artificial intelligence. What Novai brought to the technology specifically was the AI.
Yeah, really interesting. One thing that's really, as well, unique about Novai is the fact that you touched on that a little bit, but you started commercializing the technology really early on. SFC, we invested in dozens of life science companies, and that is pretty unique that a company at an early stage is already able to generate revenues from actually, blue chip pharma clients. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about who those clients are and how they use the technology currently and potentially in the future as well?
Sure. So the clients are big and small pharma, basically, because basically all of these companies, especially with early phase clinical trials where you have a drug that you want to show efficacy, are looking for neat ways where they can get an indication much quicker than is possible than conventional testing. So an example would be for, let's take a macular degeneration wet AMD drug. If you had a new drug for wet AMD, it could take you up to 2 years on a clinical trial just to be sure that you have a good result. Because we are, with our technology, looking at single cells, we can provide a readout much earlier. And I'm talking about months or days to months, okay? So we could tell the drug company for a proof of concept study, yes, your drug is working, and they could carry on and having a much bigger trial with confidence that they have a signal in patients, as opposed to those that haven't and they can fail fast. So it's a de-risking on the length of duration of that trial. The other thing we do, and I think I've already suggested that, is they can use us to get those patients at highest risk of disease progression. Those high risk patients, we can give them and say, look, these patients are more likely to lose their vision within the next 2 or 3 years. These are the ones with the highest DARC signal. And it therefore makes absolute sense that if you have a high DARC signal and your drug works, if it works, you will see a good reduction in the DARC signal. So the higher level of risk is associated with a greater opportunity to reduce that sickness or the DARC signal if it works. So we stratify, we enrich patient populations as a result. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it does. And so that's today, and obviously in the future, you hope to, subject to certain regulatory milestones, to go into a different phase, a more, potentially a much bigger market as well, as a diagnostic tool for these pharma clients as well.
Absolutely. So with pharma, actually, our next, I think, big inflection milestone is to get approval for DARC, which is currently already approved as an exploratory endpoint, to be actually approved as a biologic that can be used in patients. So we've already done around 400 patients. So we have a good amount of data already. But that would then mean that pharma will take us, instead of just doing us an early stage clinical trials, we will be in the much bigger numbers of late clinical trials. And that really is where there is a big inflection in our revenue, because lots of patients means a lot more money for Novai because of the way we do it on a per patient basis for costings. But as you say, it's not just pharma. Obviously, my ambition was in addition to getting new drugs to patients quicker, it's also to help patients get the best way or appropriate way of managing their disease much earlier. And that is the next stage for us, to integrate into the normal clinical pathway. Because we're identifying changes much earlier, we can also tell when the patient actually needs treatment, if they have treatment, whether they've responded quickly enough. But ultimately, my big vision has been and will always be using the eye as a window onto the brain and other conditions as a screening tool. So currently this is an intravenous biologic, but we have a nasal version that we're using routinely in preclinical studies. If this can be done in patients as a self-administered nasal, then, most people can be assessed on the high street, or, even in camps in deepest, darkest areas of the developing world, to make it accessible for everybody, to spot disease early.
Yeah. And so the potential of the company goes actually much beyond, well, obviously its current phase, but, as you say, it's bigger than eye disease. The potential market, the potential opportunity for Novai is quite large, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're talking, billions. And I actually don't like telling anybody what the screening accessible market would be, because it would sound silly. It would be so big. So I'll avoid using those numbers. But in terms of us, the 60 billion market is really the initial total accessible market that we're going for. And obviously we're starting small and we're being conservative as how we expand. But I've mentioned to you, pharma phase 3 trials, but with the integration into clinic so that you're used routinely in clinic, that will dwarf that income that's going to be coming from pharma.
Yeah. I mean, I can only say for SFC, one thing that we've always liked about Novai is that you've got this big vision, this path to a very, very large opportunity, but you also have a very solid business model today, and with incremental steps above that make the investment feel less risky in a way, although it's still risky. We'll touch on that. But you've got this incremental, basically, ladder of opportunity that you can climb, subject to various regulatory approvals, etc., and development of technology. But I think Novai as an investment opportunity is very attractive for this reason. But as I said, great opportunity usually comes with a certain level of risks. So where would you say are the main risks for the company going forward? Obviously, we've discussed already the regulatory path that's ahead of you. But yeah, do you want to expand a little bit on that? Where do you see ways to mitigate those risks as well?
Sure. I suppose the state of the FDA at the moment would just be the first risk might be a delay in getting the biologic approved, and that's been realistic. But I would still say 2026 would be when we would have it, because unusually for a company, we've already had interactions with the FDA. For example, they've got a drug master file for us. We're already being used in the States for pharma trials. So we are. It's not as if they're not familiar with us. So that would be the first risk. The second risk would be getting the clinical decision support tool into market as quickly as I'd like. And we've been a little bit conservative, and even though I wanted everything yesterday when we started the company, one thing that being CEO has really shown is you have to do things in a focused and stepwise manner. And so we at the moment say that we would get income from the integration into the clinical decision support tool. This is the integration to clinic in 28, 29. That is conservative, but there is a possibility that we don't get as fast uptake. We believe the reimbursement will be good. We've already had very good reimbursement feedback, both for payers as well as with the key opinion leaders who are really interested. If I can just go off the side a little bit here, just to tell you why they're interested. When we talk about macular degeneration, there are two types. The one that people are aware of is the one that's being treated at the moment with injections into eye, the wet form. You might have come across this before. The more predominant form is the atrophic form, and that actually accounts for a lot more vision loss, which until now has been irreversible. But within the last year and a half, 2 new drugs have been approved by the FDA for treatment of that blinding atrophic form. The problem is there isn't a good way of identifying which patients would benefit most, so which patients are going to lose their vision, and therefore you could justify an expensive drug for their use. And that is why these key opinion leaders and the insurers are very keen on us, because we could really help not only the patient, obviously, by putting them on treatment when they need to be, and so they don't lose their vision. We can help the clinician as well, because the clinician doesn't need to be burdened by having patients who don't need to be inpatients seen by them. And then the payers, because the last thing they want is for a patient to be put on inappropriate medication, and we can really tighten that decision. So that is the reason why I think we have such a demand in America for this next stage of the clinical decision support tool.
Do you think of other risks in the market?
Yeah. So the other risk would be getting the nasal version in, but that's again in the future, because that is another big inflection for us.
Yeah.
Because it becomes much more accessible, and the speed at which we get adoption, I think, would also reflect on, in this country, how it would be taken up. Because, I can tell you as an ophthalmologist, we don't have enough ophthalmologists or even nursing and allied health professionals to look after giving intravenous injections routinely. You can in America, and the reimbursement system allows you that ability. Yes, you have another type of test that you can offer. So in this country, the nasal would go down well, and parts of Europe. And so this is our thinking as to why that nasal will be important. But, as I mentioned to you, prioritizing the next steps is very much part of what we do. And so obviously, although we'd like to get the nasal done as soon as possible, it really depends on our revenue fitting into the strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, very good. And one final question, Francesca, for me. Talking about this current round, the ASA round, the broader Series A, why do you need this money? If I'm an investor, what's the impact of my investments? How is Novai going to be using this funding? And what is that going to help the company achieve?
So for the ASA, the big thing is this biologic license approval. I've already mentioned to you what it means to us, allowing us to do late stage pharma trials in the first instance, but then also the eventual integration. And the ASA really puts us on the right footing. So we have this pre-IND meeting first, then we will be putting that package together. To get that done speedily, that money will really help, because I would like us to aim for Q2, Q3 for BLA approval. And so when I said 2026, that's what I meant. Series A, I think, will be a different kettle of fish, because obviously once we have the BLA approval and we have that FDA backing, things should move much quicker. And that Series A will help us with our sales team and ensuring that we sort out our American market and we have correct funding for that. So I think those are the two things that I would say. So for me at the moment, getting BLA approval is really important for us, and ASA is key to that.
Yeah. No, very good. Exciting times.
Yeah.
Francesca, that's brilliant. I think that was a really good overview of, yourself, the company, and the exciting plans you guys have ahead of you. So really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Joseph. I think I probably talked a bit longer than you probably thought I was going to.
That's absolutely fine. Obviously, if anyone watching this has any questions, we're available to answer anything. So yeah, no, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesca. And
thank you, Joseph.
bye now.